So, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back for another space. This one is going to be split in two parts. The first part is going to regard the latest cope drama from Michael Kaufman over the situation in Ukraine. And the second part will be a more tactical and strategic review, generally speaking, given that it's obvious that the Ukrainian defensive system that we discussed over the opening days of 2025 has performed exactly as it was laid out in that thread. I will find the thread on the thread app. We'll add a follow-up. I'm going to also ask the people who probably have access to it, because I know that a couple of guys from the group have it. So you can continue. The thread will be missing the pictures, given that the account under which I had written the thread has been suspended since, and therefore the images and the different visual inputs out there have been taken out. In any fashion, you will still see enough to make your own opinion. And as I said, the biggest issue for Ukraine right now is that apparently a bunch of autists on Twitter can look at what they're doing and basically give a very detailed prediction on how they're going to fare for over 10 and a half months, which is, I'm sorry to say, guys, an absolute shit show, because it means that there is no control, there is no design on the way the Ukrainians are fighting right now. And we're having a major breakdown on many people, from Andy, the pedo, to Jihadi Julian, to Sternenko. All these people are understanding that, in fact, the issue is not only the lack of manpower. The issue is not Russian attrition. The issue is not Rubicon. The issue is not Russia as a whole. The issue is that Ukraine is not up to the task, and intellectually, and also, I'd say, competence-wise, the Ukrainian military and political leadership is not up to the task. It's not up to standard, and it's very understandable. I'm not going to be overly critical of them because, well, there is not much to say about that. But a lot of the mistakes made by them have to do with the fact that they were basically born by the US and Western ISR, Intel, and short-term supplies, which were a huge bunch in 2022, and they used them like they would use them in a short-term counteroffensive war, which worked for two main areas. One of them, of course, was Kharkov, not unexpected, but still. And the other was the western bank of the Dnieper, so basically parts of Kherson and parts of Mykolaiv that were lost. Now, while I'm going to start with Michael Kaufman, most of it is because he has never made a mea culpa. If you read his analysis for the last 3.5 years, Kaufman has this mantra where Russians are stupid, Russians are underperforming, and Russians are absolutely not up to the task, whereas the Ukrainians are being nimble, agile, all this bullshit, yada, and they are winning. Of course, the reality on the map is slightly different. We all know how different it is, and this year we've had it in full. Given that the biggest, I think, breakdown defensively has been happening in Pokrovsk. I'm not going to say that Pokrovsk is a huge success on the Russian side. Quite the contrary. For me, Pokrovsk is something that was destined to fall anyway, the moment the Russians came close enough. But Pokrovsk is a very interesting vision on what's going to happen to the Ukrainian defense forces the next year if nothing changes. First of all, we're going to start with analyzing Kaufman. Basically, his analysis is a drama in 4 acts. First of them is the drone fixation. So Kaufman is pointing out that the drones have become the nexus of the battle currently, which is partially true, but it's a lot more complicated than that. Drones, except for a very little portion of them, especially on the Russian side, are not autonomous. So drones, in a certain sense, are simply yet another mean of conducting battle. They have huge advantages. I'm going to speak about them a bit later. But at the same time, drones are right now functioning as yet another ammunition, and they are also relying on the system that I called since the beginning bullet gun shooter, which means that one person is going to control mostly one drone at a time, which means that if you have 30 drone operators, they're going to launch 30 drones at the same time, theoretically. Of course, there are swarms. Of course, the Russians have gone very far with their V2Us. And also the whole logic of having a relay while having multiple drones loitering, both on the Ukrainian side and on the Russian side, makes it very complicated to generalize. But when it comes to FPVs, it's mostly one guy, one drone. Now, the problem with this logic is that, as I said, you can understand if you have 30 drone operators, you're going to fly 30 drones, but if you have only 10 drone operators, you're going to fly 10 drones at the time, which means that the impact that one side is going to have on your ass with more drone operators is going to be very problematic. And it is there where Kaufman doesn't understand the drone problem. Drones are mostly based on availability and cost. So if we have to compare, drones work the same way as infantry. That's why I said you have the bullet gun shooter or bullet barrel shooter. Since 2022, the Russians have systematically integrated this drone in a very complex layering. Initially as a defense and interdiction system. Everybody remembers Bobr or Sudoplatov. But the system was plagued by a lot of issues, and you already remember all the cries by multiple people around those two projects that were saying that drones were not good. They were all obviously in one frequency, and they were easily jumbled, yada, yada, yada. And of course, there were the guys who were working with these drones. That drones are not a problem. You just need to get them through, modify them, and then they're fairly good to use. And this is what's happening on both sides, because the same complaints about drones being basically hollow shells that you need to upgrade and modify on the field is exactly what the Ukrainians are saying up to today. The issue on the Russian side was that the quality control and optimization was not under the task of the Russian Ministry of Defense. And we could say that it was unfortunately one of the major issues that were plaguing the Shoigu era, which were partially solved or fully solved, depending on how you want to see it, under Belousov, by basically taking out the lion's share that the volunteers had under the old system. Under the old system, you had Sudo that was making the VT-40 and the SS-40, and then you had other manufacturers like Umpir, like the People's Drone. We even had at some point two Dva Pidora that was trying to sell or market their own drones. So the core issue that was solved, in my opinion, by Belousov was all this shit gone. We're going to start manufacturing large amounts, industrial amounts of FPVs, for instance, and those are going to be delivered to the crews on the ground, and those guys are going to adapt them and use them. There is nothing else. This shoehorning of the system aided the Russians to actually cross a small desert when it comes to innovation, because despite the fact that drones were not of the best quality and they had a lot of jamming issues, at least they were available in numbers, which meant that the Russians would use 20 drones to do the same thing as the Ukrainians using 10. But I told you these guys, the problem is that Ukrainians had a lot less targets to give to the Russians, which meant that a 200 drone rack for the Russian side was used to attack only 15 Ukrainian targets, where the Ukrainians would have to use the same 200 drone rack on the other side to attack 30 to 40 Russian targets. And not everyone would be a score, which meant that the Russians there had disparity, despite the fact that Kaufman is talking about this drone zone where Ukrainians had an advantage. That's just not the case. The problem is that the Russians were mostly still using large logistical and fighting units, and this meant that the losses were a lot more painful, visually at least, because of course on the other side the Ukrainians had also losses, but we never really saw them, given the major issue of the Russian footage up to a certain point being radio frequency had very little aftermath. Some of it was there, but most of it wasn't there. And also failure rates for radio frequency drones, for wireless drones, were extremely high on both sides. There was talk on both sides from 30 to 60 at some point, and then later to 2024 from 50 to 80% of failures to reach the target or do enough damage to be counted as such. Now, the volunteer issue with Russia hasn't really moved on, in the sense that the volunteers are still proposing FPVs, but they are just being slighted, and this is causing a lot of grief. This is why we have idiots like Kalashnikov or Kasharova that is yapping, because part of their business or the sustainment system for the Russian military has gone awry, given the Russian Ministry of Defense, the Russian state, to be more precise, has taken over that loophole where some people were making money, despite the fact that they were also innovating, because that's the thing. So having this mix of systems, as I said, and having all this bureaucratic red tape, but also small alleyways when people could both profit but also scam, because those go hand to hand, made it difficult for the Russians to actually get that next level where Rubicon is allegedly now. It made it very complicated to work systematically because of all different types of FPVs, and also it made it more complicated for the Russians to start systemizing a electronic warfare counter action, which meant that a lot of these small batches of FPVs, when they were given to the front, for instance, one of 4 would be non-jammable because the frequency would be different, but the rest would just sit there and not being used properly, or they're going to be used but on a different vision and different area of the front. And also a lot of theft. There is still theft within the Russian military, and people are appropriating things that aren't theirs and then reselling them. I mean, that's why war is a racket, by the way. And all this made it both complicated, as I say, to bypass Ukraine electronic warfare, but also made it very complicated to actually strike way beyond the 5-10 kilometer zone, which meant that the logistics just behind this 5-10 kilometer zone were mostly unhampered, and this allowed the Ukrainians to actually accumulate on that safe, quote-unquote, area, and then try their magical attempts to push through, which one of them happened in Kursk, and it is Kursk that actually would give also birth to Rubicon, for which Kaufman is pointing out that they are the most feared group of the Russian drone operators, because they are hunting ISR units, they are hunting drone ops, and then of course are hunting logistics. Once again, this is not exactly true. Rubicon is hunting everything that can be hunted. It doesn't matter if it's a tank, it doesn't matter if it's a fucking UGV, it doesn't matter if it's some asshole trying to infill. Rubicon will go after it for as long as it is on the area of operation, area of action. Now, the other problem that Rubicon is coming with for the Ukrainians is that, first of all, it was a streamlining of both drone operators and practices. But it wasn't just purely infrastructure. So it wasn't just, okay, we're going to grab 50 guys from one unit, 50 guys from another, and these guys are going to be Rubicon. It's not only that. There was a technical challenge that was raised, and it was also, most importantly, new means of action. We can qualify these in, first of all, the passive detection and strike system. To be able to do this, as I said, Rubicon introduced two things. First of all, they were the first to use the Prince Vandal of Novgorod optical fiber drones, and also some of the now known and less known Chinese and domestic passive radars that are being used to actually pick up flying points of Ukrainian drone operators, and then, of course, follow them over there and take them out. The highly successful combo in this case, which is the passive detection and strike, relied, as I said back in the day, especially in the era of Kursk when they were first introduced massively, into having a passive detection system, be that by a synthetic aperture radar borne by Orions or foreposts, but also, most importantly, by drones equipped with these arrays, and also by using these portative passive radars, Chinese, Russian, Belarusian, which would point out small drone movements and then create a mapping of flight areas. Once this mapping was created, as I told you, they would send the OptiFiber drones, which had a huge advantage compared to the wireless drones. They didn't emit on the usual radio wave scanners, given that they were insulated via the optical fiber. However, they had the downsides being a very large braking frame and rather a bit slower than the usual wireless drone, to have a signature on the same kind of passive radars that the Ukrainians are also using to detect flight areas for ISR. So basically, initially, Ukrainians were using passive radars for Orlan type drones, for Zala type drones, for Lancet type drones, and for bigger like Merlins. And then suddenly they had to fine tune these radars for Prince Vandals. Why? Because the usual detection methods were not working, given that there was a wire connection, therefore no emanation of radio frequency waves. This, as I said, has a fully passive, fully silent strike pattern, which we saw recently with a couple of videos. Like, for instance, you see a Prince Vandal going after a Bogdana crew still being busy, and they didn't realize the drone was coming until it was way too late. And the second part was the systematic stacking. Rubicon is taking one area of operation and is stacking that shit with as much drones and as much counter drones as possible, which means that the area is completely cleared out and the Ukrainians start bleeding. Initially, it's not very bad. I mean, they could lose 5, 10, 15, 20, even 30 assets on the first day. They're going to stop for a while, pause, see what's going on. They're going to send a second wave. That second wave is going to be cold. If you remember, the culminating point of this tactic was the Pisarivka road, when at some point Rubicon started to show the results of their work, and we had in a few days over 200 to 300 vehicles attacked on the road, with the major part of them absolutely burning and being destroyed, or at least taken out of combat. The baptism of fire of the system was Giri. If you remember, it was the stupid push by a bunch of Ukrops in Kursk. It happened the 13th to the 14th of August 2024, and everybody remembers the result. They lost their whole, I'd say, platoon of BTRs with half a company of men in them. All BTR-4s were destroyed. The pickup was destroyed. 2 other vehicles that had stolen from locals were destroyed, and we remember over 20 captured, and the rest, of course, just disappearing in nature. You know, Kursk had a huge appetite for pigs, so pigs got eaten. And then that baptism of fire, which was also accompanied by means on the ground, at least 2 BTR-82s, has evolved now into a completely more sinister thing. As I said, Ruby Zone has gone from what we know since Giri to basically rape. Ruby would post themselves into an axis and will absolutely turn it into a shit show for the Ukrainian military. We had that in the axis going from Rodinskoye to Mirnograd. We had this in Kupiansk. We had this in Zaporozhye. We had this in Konstantinovka. If you see the map from Crimea Caprice of Ukrainian losses within the city of Konstantinovka and around it, it's extremely telling of who the fuck is operating there. This has gone to a way where the Russians have set up the standard for the first automated strike system, which is the V2U. This strike system that hits between 40 and 50 up to 60 kilometers is now fully automated. As Sergei Flash has said on the other side, you launch this onto a cluster of road network, that thing flies and then starts striking on the ground, and you start having losses. The bigger problem with the V2U is that both systems are now in operation, one with a man in the loop and the other fully automatic. The fully automatic system will have issues in the sense that it will go after whatever target is on the road. The man in the loop, okay, the operator will deselect the target if it sees that, for instance, it's an ambulance or a taxi or kids or whatnot. I mean, we are the THD crew, so on that point, not always a good choice. But who cares? The overemphasis on drones, the way that Kaufman is currently pointing out, has nothing to do with the mining, the artillery, and the other means of action. It has to do with the fact that drones offer a completely different view on precision targeting. First of all, is the cost. Today, even optifiber FPVs will cost you less than a contracted artillery round of 155 or 152 millimeters. We're speaking for Ukraine. We're not speaking about Russia. For Russia, the FPV allows something else, and as I said, is the footprint. This works also for Ukraine, by the way. The drone footprint is completely different. You do not need a large tube of metal to fire your thing. The noise footprint is very small compared to the huge amount of decibels thrown in the fucking environment by firing a large caliber artillery gun, which also contributes to counter battery radars working. And most importantly, you have a very large window of killing with a drone, whereas you have a very short window of killing with artillery round. You can bracket, of course, so you fire one round, second round, third round, fifth round. But that bracketing is going to be mostly misses unless you're using a guided ammunition, which then changes completely the cost factor. The cheapest, even the Kvitnik on the Ukrainian side was over $20,000. So basically, even for FPVs that, like you would use 10 optifiber FPVs, if you take the most expensive ones, cheaper ones you could be at between 12 and 15. So you understand the issue. Now, of course, there is the speed situation. If you are using artillery, you're 100% sure of your shot, or at least the area denial is going to be good. Mostly it's not going to be, so you're going to have to bracket, as I said, advance the fire towards the target. Now, the other situation with drones, as I said, is that you have this huge advancement of the... Don't worry, guys, it's not for me. So you will have this huge advancement when it comes to how the... maybe it is for me, actually. No, I'm joking. How are you going to follow up with your drone? With the drone, you will have a overall kill window of up to 10 to 15 minutes in pursuit. You're going to use the same drone, you have your target, and you're going to fly it until that thing hits. Of course, unlike with artillery, which would have the momentum and the acceleration, a drone will rely mostly on the explosive power and the effect of that explosive power. If you are using a heat jet, it's going to be a penetrating shot, and you're going to hope to hit something flammable or explosive to have a secondary action, or simply that you're going to cross the path of at least one or two infantry dismounts in the vehicle that you're targeting in order to actually cause losses. Whereas the artillery, as I said, if you hit in a certain sense, you have high chance of causing multiple casualties, or causing extremely high damage to the vehicle. Whereas if you don't hit, you have to hope that the fragmentation pattern of your round is going to make the trick and still inflict losses. It's very important to understand that 152 or 155 millimeter round hitting within 5 to 15 meters is going to have a rather large amount of damage on light infantry or light vehicles, and it's more than probably going to take out the vehicle at hand. So there are pros and cons, but the drones, as I said, offer you the possibility to be extremely precise and also the pursuit time. So there is no red area like for artillery. For the other side, you're going to pursue them until they basically either stop or they are out of your target range, which, as I said, is going to be extremely complicated given that the drones now can travel without a problem over 20 kilometers, so they're going to follow you for a pretty long period of time. So when, as I said, we're trying to see through the way Kaufman is trying to justify the situation of drones, we need to understand that it's not because of some kind of overemphasizing and that people are making mistakes to overinvest in drones. No, drones offer the mean to go beyond what you can cross right now and strike precisely at a cheap cost. It doesn't mean that people are using drones because everything is mined that you can advance. Russians are proving that you can infiltrate, and Ukrainians are also proving that you might try to stop these infiltrations by obstacles. but passive obstacles do not cut it anymore. Usually passive obstacles are to be supplemented with, infantry, which would actually cover the gaps. But because the Ukrainians do not have the manpower to do so, they are relying on drones. So the other part, but this is something that Kaufman recognizes, is that the attrition on the Ukrainian side is large enough to not allow them to actually mount a sustained and continuous line of defense. This is the next act. So this was Act 2. The casualty count. So, of course, Kaufman, being a retard and being a pro-Ukrainian, he's going to use numbers that we know are fantasy. So, for instance, he goes off with 25,000 irrecoverable Russians, which I'm trying to tell you, it's just not possible. As at the level we are right now, it's just not possible to have 300,000 irrecoverables for this year. And it is not possible because the attacks that the Russians are conducting, according to Kaufman himself, are maybe a platoon split in one or two people, fire teams or units or binomes, call it as you fucking want. But this doesn't cope well with a rate of 7,000, 6,500, 6,000, 7,000 killed per week. Because it means that you are losing, killed or maimed, because we're speaking about irrecoverables. Basically, people who cannot return to action. And it says also that the ratio killed and wounded has completely changed. You have a lot less wounded, even those who are wounded die. Which means that, as I said, you need to lose 1,000 guys a day, killed or maimed, to the point that they cannot return. And this is just not what's happening. It's not. And I would love to be wrong on this one, because it would really show the intention and dedication of the Russian leadership into winning this war, but it's just not the case. And even if you had losses and missing people, you do not get to 1,000 killed or maimed per day. It's not there. I would love to be wrong on this one, I'm saying once again, but it's just not there. So Kaufman, of course, goes off Ukrainian falsifications and also Ukrainian claims, which, is par for course. At the same time, do not forget that Ukrainians up to last year were claiming stuff like 1,300, 1,600, 1,800 liquidated per day. But this year, we're seeing 900, 700, 850, 880 liquidated per day. So, based on the Ukrainian leadership itself, Ukrainian HQ numbers, the casualties for the Russian side are going down compared to last year, especially around the area of Kursk. But suddenly, Kaufman says that this year they've lost more, despite even the Ukrainians themselves lowering the alleged losses of the Russian side. In any case, it's not very complicated to understand what Kaufman is trying to do. And this we have always said. Kaufman is going by the fact that Russians are advancing, but only because they are not afraid to lose people. And it is there when things need to be said. The GSU has not lowered the casualty count. It hasn't lowered the casualty count mostly because we are seeing the casualty count through the camp kills. And we are also seeing the casualty count through the light vehicle poaching that even Rubicon is doing. We're not going to start looking at other outfits out there. Just Rubicon. Rubicon per month is hitting on tape over 2,000 targets. 1,000 to 1,400 of them are light vehicles or UGVs, but mostly pickups and shit like that. Which means that even if you kill I'd say 800 drivers and wound 800 shotgun passengers. We know that there is a lot worse. I posted a couple of images already with a whole Max Pro turned around in Kursk, where the whole dismount unit had been killed inside the Max Pro. That's something else. It's not about that being an outlier, but just we're going to go with the lowest common denominator. So let's say you are killing and wounding 1,600 guys strictly by Rubicon alone. Those guys are being killed in the back, mostly. They are in transit. They are over 8 to 9 kilometers in the back, or even further than that. Then you got the VSU strikes. Then you got the Iskander strikes. Then you got the UMPK strikes. And then you got the guys getting surrounded, like right now in Mirnograd. Plus you got the exchanges month per month. The Russians have not stopped giving at least 1,000 guys per month. When you start stacking up the bodies, you can completely understand that the GSU is not lowering its casualties, despite using UGVs. In a certain sense, it is because of using UGVs and using these robotized means that the Ukrainian side is lowering its combat capability. For instance, for logistics, the UGVs are safer than a pickup, but the carrying capacity is between 20 and 50 kilograms. Carrying capacity of any kind of small shitty car, let's say a fucking Lada Samara, is going to be at least 400 kilograms. Not complicated. It's pretty simple. It's just a matter of fucking volume. So it's true that with that Lada Samara, you might lose the two guys that one is driving or the other is riding shotgun. But the cargo you're going to drop at your advance point is going to be between 20 times to 8 times more important than with a UGV. On top of it, the UGVs are extremely slow and vulnerable. We've seen this on Rubicon clips. Every day they have somewhere between 5 and 10 UGVs backed. This does mean that the Ukrainians are using them, but it also means that they are losing them. So the problem we're seeing with this logic from Kaufman is that once again, he's in denial over the reality, and it's completely logical. He is showing his true face. He's batting for his side, and I'm not concerned about him being a sleazy liar. What I'm concerned about is that this guy is still giving false hope to Ukrainians by bludgeoning the truth with these bullshit numbers from the GSU. As I said, losses during transit, rotation, evacuation have gone up. It's on tape. We can have this discussion as much as we want. The tape is tape. And Kaufman said there is little infantry forward allegedly, but that's just not true. For that, you go to other groups like Sparta or Flying Dutchman, and you're going to see the same groups of infantry being taken out by drone drops, by artillery. The latest group of Ukrainians trying to get out of Pokrovsk that was hit by artillery round on a street corner. It's just the same. Kaufman is not telling the truth here. But on this part, I fear that it is because he is among the Ukrainians, not because he's looking the facts and the footage and stuff like that. So on this one, it's just being a stupid shill, batting for his team. I hope it's like that because it will be a lot less problematic than actually lying prima facie. And as I said, UGVs reduce the capability because of logistical gap between even a small car. And then when it comes to attrition, we have this logic where Kaufman says that the only successful pushes that the Ukrainians have been going on is when they are fully supported by drones, infantry, intelligence, artillery, whatever. And he gives as a successful example Kupiansk. In my opinion, he should have used the screen in Dobropila instead of Kupiansk, because Kupiansk, the only visual proof we have that there was anything. Okay, it's not the only visual as such, but the one that has been used for as long as it's been used to talk about a cutout of the Kupiansk line on the Russian side has been the infamous 2 M113 raid, where everybody got killed by literally optic fiber FPVs. And we have the kill count of these guys being outside the M113s. You can count them. I can repost the pictures if you want. So, on that sense, the problem with Kaufman is, as I said, in my opinion, he's not watching tape. And it's fucked up, because tape is everything, in my opinion. But he's not watching tape, therefore you have this situation you have it right now, where Kaufman is saying stuff that's completely out of the fucking woods when you start reading at it. Then he goes on to say the ground war is defined by plots, by pickets of 2-3 people defending on the Ukrainian side, the 1-2 people attacking on Russian side. It's just not true. The ground war on both sides is shaped mostly by the amount of explosives that these people are throwing to each other. And the Russians are advancing because they are throwing a lot more explosives to the other side and more precisely than before. And Rubicon is just part of that system. Rubicon starts hunting your logistics, starts hunting your artillery, starts hunting your tanks. Suddenly, your sector is completely shaped, and the only thing that you have is UGVs and infantry. Infantry moves up because they need to evacuate people, rotate, and stuff like that. Their holding points are mapped, and UMPKs fly. Once UMPKs have been doing the job, then you're going to start the small infiltration groups on the Russian side, accumulation and advance. The problem of the 2-3 plots has nothing to do with Ukraine manning the whole line with drones and all these small issues. Those 2-3 plots are, if you want, small tripwires that need to, in a certain sense, give way to a firmer defensive line on the back, and we've seen the Ukrainians build trenches and shit like that. However, and we said this, there is a lack of infantry to man those trenches, which means that once your tripwire plots, pickets, whatever you want to call them, fail, and your drone wall fails, there is a huge gap, and in a certain way, pre-made positions for the Russians to occupy, advance through, and then start seizing objectives well behind the drone line and those defensive plots. This is how you're going to get people in Mirnograd completely surrounded, despite the fact that the Russians initially didn't have these huge attacks through the city of Pokrovsk. The only thing they did, the latest footage actually, it was just pure beauty. Guys on motorbikes and Mad Max mobiles just taking positions in the city, started to mob up clueless Ukrainians who have not seen them, and then just directing artillery fire, drone fire, and whatever fire onto Ukraine's strong points, mopping them up and advancing. And of course, this is counterattacked by the Ukrainians, mostly with drones, Baba Yagas and shit like that, and to a certain extent then with physical counterattacks, which are more and more ridiculous. We saw that with Black Pork Down at the northwestern entrance of Pokrovsk. We know how that went. And unfortunately, Koopman cannot even decide if he's stupid or if he's lying, because both of them could be true in this case. Now, the other situation is when both sides are like understaffed, and this is not true. And this is how we know, because since Ukrainians have tried to push, there is only one sector where it has worked. And it has worked in the Dobropila screen, which was completely expected to crumble. I mean, I'm on tape saying that screen was just to push Ukrainians and force them to make a choice. attack the screen or defend the city. Ukrainians did exactly what was expected of them. They attacked the screen, so they accepted to lose the city, both Milogard and Pokrovsk. And once again, this was normal. The Ukrainians knew they were going to lose the city the moment the Russians were close enough. What they didn't want is to end up with a situation where the city is being mopped up and the Russians are already cutting the highway, Kramatorsk, Dobropila, and then are already in Dobropila. And once they're there, you lose your first bypass. You need to completely go over. And I explained this in 2024 and late 2023. The second Dobropila bypass is almost 90 kilometers away, and you need to go through Izium to go to Kramatorsk. The moment you do that, your logistics in between the northern Dobropila region up to the passage of the secondary bypass going to Izium is literally devoid of main course logistics, because that's how the Ukrainian transport network works, which is basically big fat zero. Now, one last thing I want to add, because I need this as a way to do away with Kaufman. I really think that Michael Kaufman is a piece of shit, in the sense that he is saying that he went to the ground, spoke with the Ukrainians, and has the gall to then starts talking about the Russian military as underperforming tactically. I do not understand why someone like Kaufman, who allegedly goes to the Ukrainian side and see what they're doing, and then see the map, can say about Russians underperforming tactically. As I said, the losses in equipment have gone down on the Russian side. They're still rather high, but they're very close to the Ukrainian ones, which are not on the offensive, which is absolutely nuts. You people need to understand, because don't forget that a lot of the losses that are being added to Oryx, for instance, are due to the fact that the Ukrainians can attack Crimea via Starlink-based suicide drones, which take out at least about 100 assets, boats, AD, helicopters, small derelict planes. I mean, it's not a big issue, but just to explain to you, there are areas where Ukrainians still have the ability from time to time to exert pressure, and which is just numbers. Those do not help with the front line, but there are still losses that go through. Take out those 100, and the difference between Ukraine and Russia when it comes to pure losses is so little that it doesn't matter, and it is there when you should not understand it. At that point, why the hell is the defending side losing that much as the offending side, which technically and theoretically has been always pointed out as needing 3 attackers for 1 defender? In this case, you have the defenders having huge trouble keeping their tanks alive, and more recently, but that's not the case, it's already over a year that's like this, their artillery alive. Now, the biggest problem I'm having with a lot of people who are watching this war, especially Kaufman, that's why I called him a piece of shit, is that Kaufman, in my opinion, understands very well what he's saying, and he understands that what he's saying is not true. But he cannot, and on that aspect, he's like Deep State, for instance, or all those outlets who are now taking Sirski's side or hints when they will not tell the truth, because the truth is not photogenic, it's not sexy. And we're going to go with the situation, which is Act 3, the gray zone. So, if you want an example of why the gray zone is not a gray zone, it doesn't exist as such, you have to look at the Dobropila screen. Ukraine, despite stacking a lot of units there and overpowering the Russian foreign force, the Russian screen force, still took and still is taking. Now, just to be sure, guys, we had that in August, so basically August to September 1 month, September to October 2 months, October to November 3 months. So in 3 months, the silent has been mostly reduced, but it's still active, which allows the Russians, of course, to basically clean up Pokrovsk and choke Mirnograd. So, despite the fact that the units sent to counter the screen were, as I said, superior in number and allegedly in quality, it still took 3 months, 3+ months, 3 months and 6 days since the situation declared itself. So, why? And that's what I told you guys. That's attrition. We're going to speak a little bit more about this after the Kaufman debacle. But the Ukrainians simply do not have enough men to lose, first of all. And the units sent to do that do know that thing. Especially Azov. Azov is a skirmishing unit. I told you guys. It's a PR unit. They're going to make some pew-pew. They're going to kill some people, show some POWs, but the moment when they have to stay and take the brunt of the punishment, they will flee or they will pull back so as not to get smashed, which means that they will delay the advances and the operational results that are expected from them. The problem with this is when it comes to the gray zone. The troops that are striking in this gray zone, on both sides, they are maneuvering. Therefore, the gray zone is not the thing. The gray zone is a maneuver space. But as a maneuver space, we always had this call, which was no man's land. But in this case, the gray zone in Ukraine, especially how it's being mapped, is a purely political choice and a PR choice that leads to, as I said, the hand washing of one side and the denial of the reality on the ground. Why is that the thing? In 2023, when the Ukrainians were counterattacking, the gray zone, based on COP state, so basically the unknown zone, changed in 4+ months, only 20 square kilometers. It went from 650 to 670 something. So the advances on the Ukrainian side, the liberation of territory, was consequential. And deep state, deep COP state, mapped it like this. But since the end of Kursk, so basically April, May, June, July, August, September, October, 7 months, the gray zone has doubled. So, what does that mean? It has gone from almost doubled, It has gone from 750 square kilometers to 1,375 square kilometers according to deep state today. Of course, you're gonna say, yeah, but you have 4 months and then you have 7 months. Yes, I know. Divided by 2. Divide the almost 700 kilometers by 2. I have no issue with that. It's gonna still be 350 square kilometers, right? But previously, COP state had no issue mapping areas taken or not taken straight away. And of course people are going to say, yeah, but it was a different war. The drones were not this. Nah, it wasn't a different war. It was just the same war. The same areas when both sides were maneuvering, when you had Ukrainian soldiers trying to attack on the Velika-Novosilka axis with 4 maps getting all killed as fuck, still was being mapped by COP state as Ukrainian taken. The same thing happens to the Russians, but the Russians do not get the benefit of the doubt. However, as I said, Cope State, and Kaufman in this case is following Cope State, which is basically the vision being sold by the gays to Okabe. It's gray. Nobody controls it. We're still fighting over it. But it's not true. The maneuver area that we're seeing in most of the gray areas that Cope State is pointing out is fully Russian. The control of it is overly Russian. Half of it at least. So your gray zone of 1,375 square kilometers, in reality, it's around 800. And the rest of it is captures that you don't want to give. Why? Because politically, it would be explosive. And there's a obvious telltale over what the gray zone is. When Ukrainians actually are present on that area, as wiring whatever, suddenly the area has been reconquered, and you see it on blue or on green. But it was the gray zone. Russians theoretically never captured it. So why are you pointing it out as a liberated area? You understand the paradoxical issue with this. And of course, this is a way to admit the situation. And I have no problem with that. Like, Cope State, we know what happened after Kursk. They were threatened with mobilization. They just admitted that they were not going to be a pain in the ass. And of course, they have time after time made critical posts over local command and shit like that. But most of it is not a direct criticism of Syrskyi. Therefore, you have this issue where once you analyze the Kaufman-Cope, you understand that there is no real gray zone. What it is a way for the Ukrainian leadership, political and military, to obfuscate the losses, to obfuscate the situation by saying, this is gray. Therefore, it's fine. And then Kaufman goes on with the logic that So guys, I'm really sorry. I cannot fucking understand what's going on with this awful site. Really, it's beyond everything. For about 10 minutes, I tried to reconnect to my own space, and it was not possible. Something kicked me out of my own space. Yeah, that's funny. And yeah, I'm not really sure about what's going on. In any case, I'm gonna wrap up Kaufman and just tell you guys that the last part, which is the Russian underperformance, is laughable, as the Russians have been tactically getting the better of the Ukrainians on pretty much every level, and the only cope that Koopman and friends have is the alleged losses. But as I said, if the losses were that bad and the Russians were that unable to actually advance within the territorial chasm that we are seeing within the Ukrainian south especially, we wouldn't be there. And Ukraine wouldn't have a mobilization problem, as Kaufman likes to point out. Now, yeah, that was the wrap for Kaufman, and we are going to go to something far more specific, which is the tactical and strategic outlay of the rest of the year, And I already started to point out that the Ukrainian leadership had a small problem in which they hadn't managed to pile up or finish or implement the core reform, which led to a lack of numbers, lack of quality, and also lack of structure, of course. The lack of numbers, we all know what it is. I said they are not even being able to keep that the magic 800,000 people that could allow them to have a rotation for the units that are on the front. They have a huge problem with the AWOL situation, and of course the AWOL situation is made worse because since more or less the end of August, so since September, October, and early November, the situation that was under the law, the quote-unquote amnesty law, which meant that until the May 2025, if you had quote-unquote been AWOL, you could return to your unit or choose another unit to serve with, and your case would be regularized within a few days. Since then, this is not possible anymore. You cannot choose your different unit. You will have to go to the unit that you actually fled from, which meant that you are actually fucked. You cannot anymore avoid your service. And on top of it, we recently had Kostenko say that 80% of the guys who get mobilized, in a way or another, avoid the mobilization at the end stop. So basically, they are not fit enough. They pay someone to flee. They get the fuck out of the center, etc., etc., etc. In any case, what we're seeing is mostly that Ukraine has a numerical issue, and they are not solving it. The other problem, as I said, structurally, where the corps reform was supposed to help everybody like be at the same level and have core brigades lift the level of the core situation. Instead, it would bring it down for the worst brigades, and most importantly, it would bloat the quote-unquote elite brigades by pushing them through a larger responsibility level, and of course making it impossible for a proper command and control of most of the units that were under their custody. And then, of course, as I said, qualitatively, the problem is that the flows that were apparent already in 2024 when it came to the Ukrainian leadership, and those flows mixed with the political weight of any leadership in Ukraine, which is basically you cannot say no to Zelensky or Yermak because otherwise you're going to have issues. They basically blew up. Once Zalupitska was kicked out, Syrskyi took over, and Syrskyi systematically has been entertaining Zelensky's choices and Zelensky's vision. Now, there is another reason why Syrskyi has been doing this, because in a certain sense, Ukraine doesn't have much choice. Ukraine cannot start doing what they did in 2022, which is let the Russians go deep enough and then try to stop their advances by ambushes, stuff like that. Unfortunately, this is something that everybody said initially, but they didn't understood it. Now that Russia has enough troops to actually push fast enough, if the Ukrainians are to be playing elastic defense, if Ukraine starts to lose 30 to 40 linear kilometers in depth every month or so, and then tries to get back half of them, by the end of a year, Ukraine is going to lose the whole bank. There is no elastic defense the way Ukraine is playing. Actually, that's what I'm going to repeat, you guys. For Ukraine, the current plan with the hedgehog defense, with the stubbornness of keeping people in completely fucked up spots, is not out of some kind of mental illness either. Is the only chance they have to actually somehow make the Russians stop. The problem is that the Russians do not want to stop. And this comes, in a certain sense, because of the Ukrainian resistance. So this catch-22 situation, when Ukrainians resist by hoping that this resistance is going to soften the Russians, but the Russians getting in the heart, being far more excited and going apeshit against Ukrainian resistance, is exactly why, I'm going to repeat once again, we have the current situation. It's like trying to stop a gorilla from going at you, and the gorilla just doesn't get why you're getting aggressive, so it gets more aggressive. And it goes like this until one of the two is losing. The Ukrainian strategy behind this is dramatically self-defeating, but anything else would be worse for them. Let's be completely honest. Because the only chance, the only option they had behind this was, unfortunately, let's be honest, to let it go. Let it go in 2022, accept Russian demands, and then, as I said, sneakily let the Americans and Europeans in. And fait accompli NATO, Russians could suck a dick. Unfortunately, they were stupid. They listened to even stupider people. And of course, Monkey was allegedly denied by the Russian military, which once again, I will not say it enough, needs a huge praise for avoiding a couple of catastrophes. Unfortunately, not all of them, and a good part of those catastrophes avoided were also their own doing, by doing exactly what Syrskyi did with Zelensky. The Russian military accepted the political task set out by Monkey and his friends, which, I'm going to repeat, in my opinion, were absolutely abysmally wrong. You cannot start doing police actions when you do not control borders beyond your target. You cannot trust people who want you dead for now millennia, not even centuries. And you cannot accept a proxy war prepared like you were going to a fucking lace war. Anyway, this is behind us. It is what it is, and nobody needs to actually be over dramatic about it. Now, the other problem I'm having is that I said the southern bend of the Ukrainian military is getting lambasted right now. And they're getting pretty much the shit pushed in, mostly because I suspect, and a lot of people in the group suspect, that Syrskyi has transferred troops from the Zaporozhye axis to Dobropila in order to cut the salient. And it would make sense that those troops are coming from southern Donbass and Zaporozhye, because it's the easiest way to get them there, within the same area. If you are bringing your guys from Kharkov, fine, no problem. I can also understand that. But it simply doesn't make any sense in order for the Ukrainians to go fast. In my opinion, what's going on is that those 3 months these guys try to cut the salient in Dobropila, the Russians literally benefited from the gaps created in Zaporozhye and advanced. We have a copy-paste situation from last year in Ukraine. And the only thing that, in my opinion, slowed this, but as usual, slowing something and not stopping it just makes it worse at the end. So Pokrovsk maybe was slowed by Kursk, but Now you don't have Kursk and you don't have Pokrovsk. Same thing. Kursk maybe slowed southern Ukraine, but now you don't have it, and the guys are in Dnipropetrovsk, they're going to take Zaporozhye. This is what I said, that Ukraine need to stop burning the candle by both ends. Because the only thing you're doing is just hastening your demise for a temporary respite and some bullshit. And it's cute, it's cool, and everybody's fine, Don't worry about the Russians. They're stupid. They're underperforming. They're tactically inept. It's just that the maps are glowing red, but not a problem. You don't need to worry. 100 years to get the whole of Ukraine. It's true. You are over 100,000 military missing in action, but it's a small price to pay. Come on. Don't be like that, Ukraine. You were the defenders of the free world. You should be happy to die for freedom and democracy. Because this is exactly how most of pro-Ukraine pushers right now are reacting. They are demanding that people in Ukraine sacrifice themselves for scores that some fucking Estonian cocksucker needs to settle. Or the fact that some Polish retard got his grandma raped by some Asian Red Army soldier. Or for the Berlin Law Parade in 45. The reasons are aplenty. The results, just the same. So, once you start analyzing the movements of the Russian side, you can see that they are getting, in a certain sense, more punitive than they ought to be. They make sense tactically and strategically, but the advancing paces and the pushes and the punches and the breaches are taking a punitive form. The Russians are stretching the Ukrainians so hard that the whole maneuver needs to be shown at the AVN Awards in Las Vegas. Maybe Gera Gorilla will get some XB's awards, stuff like that. Because I'm sorry to tell you guys, for all the mistakes that the Russians have done and for all the stupid attempts that they had, Lapin, please, the new and reinvented Russian army, the Hobo army, is performing at a level with so less equipment lost, but of course, who says less equipment says a bit more people killed. Although I'm not really sure that there's so much difference from 24. The most important part is that the Ukrainians have no answer to the double threat, which is, I said, if Liman falls, you have a huge problem with the supply line from Izyum to Kramatorsk. If Hulyapole falls, then you have a very short and narrow window to actually try something on the ground in Zaporozhye. Anything, actually. Because I think that everything is doomed there. And finally, if you get nailed in Zaporozhye, so basically if the Russians are going to actively besiege and storm the city, you have a fucking problem. Because I said to you, the moment when Zaporozhye is offline, you're going to have to flip most of the production means towards Kryvyi Rog, which then will also be close enough for gliding bombs. I think everybody understands what that means. That means that suddenly, instead of having the Russians go through a landing on the other side of Kherson, you're going to have the Russians bombing the shit out of everything that matters. both in Kryvyi Rog, Zaporozhye, and then after that in Dnipropetrovsk. And what matters in all the cities is huge metallurgy projects, 2 dams, bridges in Zapo and Dnipro, over Dnipro. And of course, most importantly, as I said, you will have to deal with somewhere between 600,000 and 1.2 million internal displaced people, which everybody understands, as I said, and this is why I'm going to repeat what I said. This is why I think Monkey never wanted to do it. Once you start doing that, you are looking at a huge tragedy, and it's a textbook ethnic cleansing. Not that, once again, I'm having a problem with ethnic cleansing. It's just that at some point, if you want Zapo, you want the people in Zapo as well. And yeah, the problem with it is that none of this is pleasant for Ukraine, and none of this is going to be a working plan for anyone else but the people who actually hate Ukrainians. I personally have no issue with whatever. I don't care over what Ukrainian leadership is trying to do right now. I only care about what their end result is, and also what their end goal is. And so far, the end goal is pretty, I'd say, benign. There is no real intellectual challenge in what they're doing. What they're doing is trying to make the Russians, if not stop, at least relent. But they are completely confusing how the Russians operate and think with how other people operate and think. And the problem with this is that this shouldn't happen. All these people know the Russians intimately. Be that the retarded friend from Quartal 95, be that Umerov. I mean, every single one should know pretty much what to expect from the Russians. And nobody's actually looking like they know what they're doing. And the biggest problem, once you start analyzing it like that, is that the Ukrainian side is not going for a long-term objective either. What they're asking more and more is a direct and decisive strike to Russian infrastructure so the Russians would stop. But to do so, the Ukrainians would need a completely different type of strike package, not 100 or 200 drones, of which even half would get stopped and would still cause a problem. Ukrainians would need like thousands of those. But to launch thousands, to produce thousands, over and over, you need the money and you need the equipment. This doesn't exist. Nobody can produce those at that rate. The fact that the Russians are doing it with Chinese help should tell you how fucked up that is as an idea. And despite everything, the Ukrainians are not changing their defensive style, their operational approach. They're going to keep stacking people to very complicated terrain, try to hold the Russians as long as possible at the periphery of this terrain, and at some point they're going to break down just a small hole. And then they're going to find themselves once again fighting for dear life due to just not timing the retreat or whatever properly. And that's it. There is not much more to say. It doesn't mean that Ukrainians are good or bad or whatever, or they're stupid. It just means that Ukrainians cannot adapt themselves fast enough due to the fact that the conception of this war has gone beyond what this war is supposed to be for everyone. And you're going to ask me, what do you mean by that? Ukraine has created a parallel reality when it comes to this war for public consumption. And unfortunately, that parallel reality, it seems to have affected a lot of people within the leadership as well. When Syrski goes out there and lies, as I said, he knows that he's lying. It's not something that is just inventing like that. Syrski knows very well that he's lying. He has no problem with that. His whole point is to give this vision of control, which I'm pretty sure everybody within his team is very aggravated about. Because there is nothing that Syrski says, especially recently, that either makes sense or is even remotely true. And this is the problem, I'm going to repeat, this is the problem I have with Syrski right now. It's not that he's Ukrainian or whatever. It is that he's not allowing himself to be true. And this means that within few actions, he's going to find himself with the impossibility to actually defend his position as true or false, because the position would have reached his position, if you want. It's what he said about Dnipropetrovsk about a month and a half ago. Oh, it's nothing. The Russians are there just performatively. They're not going to occupy. They're not here to stay. We are 45 days after what he said, and the Russians are getting more and more area from Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So this is, I'm going to repeat, the problem with the Ukrainian leadership generally, but in this case with Syrski specifically, because he knows he's lying, but his interest right now lies with him being able to deliver these lies as truth and keep lying a bit more. And the beauty of this is that there is nobody there to contest him within the structure. The only way somehow people are trying to get rid of Zelensky and Syrski with him is corruption. But everybody knows that corruption in Ukraine doesn't work like that. Unless, of course, the order comes from abroad to, take out the comedian. A bit like the Watchmen. So, as for the next moves on the Russian side, well, right now the work is pretty much cut out, and everybody knows them. Also because we spoke about it incessantly for over a year. So, cutting the road Izium-Kramatorsk by taking Liman and completely enveloping the Oskil area, forcing the pocket east of Kupiansk to either surrender or get the fuck out of there. Then, of course, there is the shaping operations Siversk and Konstantinovka, the mopping up of the remnants of Pokrovsk, and finishing of Mirnograd. And most important part is the complete choking of the operation space between the Energodar reservoir and the Russian positions east of it. So right now they are at about 68 kilometers, 70 if we count a bit up north. So yeah, there is not much to say at this point. You know what it is. Maps are there for that. We could talk and talk, but the reality is that what needs to be defeated on the Ukrainian side is their narrative, the propension and the possibility they have to actually make up shit to cover for their losses. And this, unfortunately, I'm going to repeat, is not going to go away for as long as nobody puts them with their backs to the wall. And if you had to wait for the Russians, it would take extremely long time. In this case, at least the strong narrowing of the Zaporozhye operational space, and of course the loss of Mirnograd and Pokrovsk, and the advancement of the Russian forces towards Dobropila, and therefore the definitive cutoff of the Dobropila bypass. Once you have those, you don't need to think too much. It's quote-unquote game over for the northwestern corner of the Donbass Oblast, the Donetsk Oblast, and of course, it is big time for Ukrainians to make a choice for the rest of the Donetsk Oblast, given that what will remain at that point will be something like 16% of it, with the biggest bunch being the sister cities. And of course, right now the Russians are already in Konstantinovka and are carrying assault operation of the city, although in a very low scale. So if we need to go back to the map, well, it's very simple. There is not much to be said. The main issue for the Ukrainians is that they cannot reverse the trend and the operational overall approach. They do not have enough men. They do not have enough means to actually equip even the current manpower in order for them to do something beyond the simple stubborn resistance. And of course, their core advantage up to a certain point, which were drones, is getting equalized, at least if not overpowered by the Russians, which means that, again, on the tactical level, the Ukrainians are going to start being worse and worse, while at the strategic level, the fact that Russia has so much more to spend on them will simply choke the strategic debate and literally go on with this grindcore, as I said, which is going to be extremely painful to endure for the Ukrainians, especially for its military. Now, there is a hope, which, as I said, beside the West intervention, is also a economical contraction and crisis within Russia. The problem is that the economic crisis within Russia has no common measurement with what's happening in Ukraine, which, as I said, is forced to have probably about 40% of its GDP being given to it. So that's basically a failed state. But once again, I repeat, the problem, once you're doing this, once you're thinking like that, is that there is no way out. For Ukraine, there is no way out as it stands. And as I said, the only hope bar Western intervention would be that for some reason the Russians decide to stop. That reason can be the economy, or they get made an offer which would then facilitate further negotiations. And the only possibility that the Russians are going to take that offer is if they take too much time to get to Komshivaka, southeast actually of Zaporozhye. If it goes beyond 6 months, so basically if by March 2026 Russians are not in the vicinity, then negotiations might restart. And of course, these negotiations are going to be extremely bad for Ukraine in any case, because with the current trend of events, they would be looking at another 2,000 to 3,000 square kilometers less. And if these kilometers less are well placed, well, I don't need to tell you more. It's very possible that some situations, especially in Dnipropetrovsk and in Zaporozhye, are irreversible, and therefore the negotiation logic for Ukrainians and Russians is going to be extremely lopsided, which is Ukrainians are going to try and keep the 4 blasts as the maximum loss, whereas for the Russians it's going to be the 4 blast plus something. And if, as I said, there is a real breakdown of the defenses southeast of Zaporozhye, then the risk is that you're going to have a huge Russian infiltration that's going to envelope Orikhiv as well. And then you can already forget about Zaporozhye as well, at least this side of the Dnieper, which means that Ukraine needs to start preparing for evacuation of the big city, and therefore a bigger strain for the moment towards Dnipropetrovsk. But once again, first Pokrovsk needs to be finished, and then you're going to see the choice that the Russians are going to make. Most probably going for Zapo, as it is part of their legal political objectives, whereas going after more Dnipro without finishing Zapo still leaves the door for a reckless but potentially war-stopping operation by the Ukrainians towards Zaporozhye, and therefore the Crimean land bridge. Sorry guys, I'm very sorry about the situation with the first part of the space. Unfortunately, these things happen with Galen. So yeah, bear with me. I'm really sorry for the hiatus, but I was locked outside of my own space without any other input from myself. I will probably not take questions, but if you want to contribute, no problem. We still have like 20 minutes, so please. If nobody wants to contribute, then thank you very much for being present. So once again, I would like to apologize for the cutoff. Not my intention to do it. Elon must fix his fucking shitty side, but it doesn't work. And for as long as we are still here, of course, it's not going to do much. So thank you very much for being present once again. And see you next time, most probably Wednesday. And most probably this time with a layout of a hypothetical push towards Pavlograd, which is far, but not that far. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.